Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her brow as she adjusted her rifle for the 100th time that morning. The shooting range in rural Montana stretched out before her, targets positioned at various distances across the dusty landscape. At 23 years old, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most accurate shooters in the state, but today felt different. Today, she was pushing boundaries that most people would consider impossible. Her father, Miguel Martinez, watched from the observation deck with a mixture of pride and concern. Sarah had been shooting since she was 8 years old, starting with a simple .22 rifle that was almost too heavy for her small frame. Back then, nobody could have predicted that the shy girl from the small town of Glacier Ridge would one day attempt shots that defied conventional wisdom about marksmanship. The wind picked up across the range, creating small dust devils that danced between the targets. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the air currents against her face. This was something she had learned from her grandfather, Carlos, before he passed away 5 years earlier. He had been a sniper in the military and taught her that feeling the wind was just as important as seeing it. "Mia, you don't have to prove anything to anyone," Miguel called out, his voice carrying across the range. But Sarah knew this wasn't about proving anything to others. This was about proving something to herself. She had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. After winning the state championship in long-range shooting, Sarah had set her sights on something much more ambitious. She wanted to make a shot that would push the limits of what was humanly possible, not for fame or recognition, but because something deep inside her needed to know if she could do it. The idea had come to her during a conversation with her mentor, retired Marine Corps sniper instructor Jack Thompson. They had been discussing the longest confirmed sniper shots in military history, when Jack mentioned that most people had no idea what the human body was capable of under the right conditions. That conversation had planted a seed in Sarah's mind that grew into an obsession. She began researching everything about extreme long-range shooting. She studied ballistics, weather patterns, and the physics of projectile motion. She spent countless hours at the range, gradually increasing distances and challenging herself with more difficult conditions. Her friends thought she was becoming too focused, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant for something extraordinary. The equipment she used was meticulously chosen and modified. Her rifle was a custom-built precision instrument, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, with a barrel that had been hand-lapped for maximum accuracy. The scope was a high-end model with variable magnification, allowing her to clearly see targets at extreme distances. Every component had been selected for its ability to perform under the most demanding conditions, but equipment was only part of the equation. Sarah had spent years conditioning her body and mind for the demands of extreme precision shooting. She practiced meditation to control her breathing and heart rate. She worked with a sports psychologist to develop mental techniques for maintaining focus under pressure. She even studied with a physical therapist to perfect her shooting position and eliminate any unnecessary movement. Her training routine was intense and methodical. Every morning, she would begin with 30 minutes of breathing exercises, followed by dry fire practice to perfect her trigger control. She would then move to the range for live fire exercises, starting at shorter distances and gradually working her way out to longer ranges. She documented every shot, recording environmental conditions, ammunition performance, and her own physical and mental state. The local shooting community had taken notice of Sarah's dedication and skill. Other shooters would often gather to watch her practice, amazed by her consistency and precision. Some were skeptical of her ambitious goals, believing that certain distances were simply beyond human capability. Others were supportive, offering advice and encouragement as she pushed toward her ultimate goal. Sarah's mother, Rosa, worried about her daughter's intense focus on shooting. She understood that it was more than a hobby for Sarah, but she couldn't help but feel concerned about the risks involved in pushing the limits of long-range marksmanship. The family had many conversations about Sarah's goals, with Rosa expressing her fears and Sarah trying to explain why this challenge was so important to her. The weather forecast for the next week showed a storm system approaching the area. Most shooters would wait for better conditions, but Sarah saw an opportunity. She had been studying how environmental factors affected bullet flight, and she believed that shooting in challenging conditions would be the ultimate test of her skills. The storm would bring wind, rain, and reduced visibility, making an already difficult shot nearly impossible. Jack Thompson had warned her about attempting such a shot in bad weather. He explained that even the most experienced military snipers would typically wait for ideal conditions when taking long-range shots. But Sarah felt ready for the challenge. She had been preparing for this moment for years, and she believed that her understanding of ballistics and her physical preparation would allow her to succeed where others might fail. As she continued her practice session that day, Sarah felt a sense of calm determination settle over her. The target she had chosen for her ultimate challenge was positioned on a hillside exactly 1 mile away. It was a distance that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible for precision shooting, and attempting it during a storm would add layers of complexity that few shooters had ever faced. The sun was beginning to set as Sarah packed up her equipment for the day. Tomorrow she would begin her final preparations for the shot that would either establish her as one of the greatest marksmen in history or humble her in the face of nature's power. Either way, she knew that she had to try. Something deep inside her demanded that she push herself to the absolute limit of human capability. As she walked back to her truck, Sarah looked up at the darkening sky and felt the first drops of rain beginning to fall. The storm was coming, and with it, the greatest challenge of her life. The storm arrived 3 days later with a ferocity that surprised even the local weather service. Sarah sat in her small apartment above the gun shop where she worked, watching through the window as rain pelted the streets of Glacier Ridge. The wind howled through the mountain passes, bending trees and rattling windows. Most people in town had battened down for what looked like it would be a severe weather event, but Sarah felt a strange excitement building in her chest. She had spent the previous 3 days in intense preparation. Every detail had been calculated and recalculated. She had studied weather reports, wind patterns, and barometric pressure readings. She had cleaned and rechecked her rifle multiple times, ensuring that every component was functioning perfectly. Most importantly, she had run countless computer simulations of the shot, factoring in the expected storm conditions. Jack Thompson had called her twice, urging her to postpone the attempt until the weather cleared. He reminded her that even military snipers wouldn't attempt such a shot in these conditions. But Sarah felt a deep conviction that this was exactly when she needed to make her attempt. The storm wasn't an obstacle to overcome. It was an integral part of the challenge she had set for herself. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father. "Stay inside today, Mija. This storm is dangerous." Sarah smiled at his concern but knew that staying inside wasn't an option. She had been planning this moment for too long to let weather stop her. She texted back a simple "I love you" and then turned off her phone. The target she had chosen was positioned on a rocky outcropping 1 mile away, across a valley that was now filled with swirling wind and driving rain. She had placed it there 6 months earlier, using GPS coordinates to ensure the exact distance. It was a steel plate 12 inches in diameter, painted bright orange to provide maximum visibility even in poor conditions. Sarah began her pre-shot routine at dawn, even though the thick storm clouds made it feel more like dusk. She started with her breathing exercises, sitting cross-legged on her apartment floor with her eyes closed. She visualized the shot from every angle, imagining the bullet's flight path through the turbulent air. She could feel her heart rate slowing and her mind becoming perfectly focused. After 30 minutes of meditation, she moved to her physical preparation. She stretched her muscles, paying particular attention to her shoulders, back, and arms. Any tension in her body could affect her shooting position and throw off her aim by several inches at that distance. She had learned through years of practice that physical preparation was just as important as mental preparation for precision shooting. The weather outside continued to worsen as the morning progressed. Rain was coming down in sheets now, and the wind was gusting up to 40 miles per hour. Sarah checked her weather instruments one final time and made notes in her shooting log. The conditions were even more challenging than she had expected, but she felt ready. She carefully assembled her rifle, checking each component as she had done hundreds of times before. The custom barrel gleamed under her apartment's fluorescent lights. She mounted her scope and performed her final checks of the adjustment turrets. Everything had to be perfect because there would be no second chances at this distance in these conditions. Loading her ammunition was a ritual in itself. She had hand-loaded each cartridge specifically for this shot, weighing each powder charge to the nearest tenth of a grain. The bullets were match-grade projectiles that had been sorted by weight to ensure maximum consistency. She had test-fired dozens of rounds over the past weeks to verify their performance. Sarah put on her weather gear and gathered her equipment. In addition to her rifle, she carried a spotting scope, a portable weather station, and her shooting mat. She had chosen a firing position on a ridge that would give her a clear line of sight to the target, assuming the visibility didn't deteriorate further. The drive to her shooting position was treacherous. The rain had made the mountain road slippery, and the wind was strong enough to push her truck around. Several times she had to slow to a crawl when the visibility dropped to just a few feet. But she pressed on, driven by a determination that surprised even her. When she reached her predetermined shooting position, the full force of the storm hit her. The wind was howling across the ridge with such intensity that she had to lean into it to maintain her balance. The rain was coming down sideways, and the visibility was reduced to perhaps half a mile on a good moment. Most people would have turned around and gone home, but Sarah felt more focused than ever. She set up her equipment with practiced efficiency, despite the challenging conditions. Her shooting mat provided some protection from the wet ground, and she arranged her gear within easy reach. The spotting scope was almost useless in these conditions, but she set it up anyway, hoping for brief moments of improved visibility. The wind was the biggest challenge. At 1 mile distance, even a slight crosswind could push a bullet several feet off target. Sarah had studied wind patterns extensively and knew how to read the signs in the environment around her. She watched the grass and trees between her position and the target, looking for clues about what the wind was doing at different distances along the bullet's path. Sarah took her shooting position and looked, through her rifle scope, toward where she knew the target was located. The orange steel plate was completely invisible through the rain and wind, but she knew exactly where it should be based on her GPS coordinates and range measurements. This would be a shot based entirely on calculation and instinct, with no visual confirmation of the target. She began her final breathing routine, slowing her heart rate and clearing her mind of everything except the task at hand. The storm raged around her, but inside her bubble of concentration, everything felt calm and clear. This was the moment she had been preparing for during 3 years of intensive training and practice. The wind gauge showed gusts up to 45 miles per hour, with a prevailing crosswind of about 30 miles per hour. Sarah made her calculations, adjusting her scope settings to compensate for the expected wind drift. At this distance, she estimated the bullet would be pushed approximately 8 feet to the left if she didn't adjust for the wind. As she settled into her final shooting position, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace despite the chaos of the storm around her. This was what she had been born to do, and no amount of wind or rain was going to stop her from taking this shot. Sarah lay prone on her shooting mat, her body molded into the perfect shooting position she had practiced thousands of times. The storm continued to rage around her, but her world had narrowed to the small circle visible through her rifle scope. Rain drummed against her back, and wind tugged at her clothing, but she felt completely centered and calm. Through her scope, she could see nothing but gray sheets of rain and swirling mist. The target was completely invisible, hidden somewhere in the storm 1 mile away. This would have to be a shot based purely on mathematics, instinct, and 3 years of meticulous preparation. Most shooters would consider it impossible, but Sarah had prepared for exactly these conditions. She pressed her cheek against the stock of her rifle, feeling the familiar comfort of the weapon she had customized specifically for this moment. Every measurement had been perfect, every component selected for maximum accuracy. The rifle had become an extension of her body through countless hours of practice and training. The wind was gusting unpredictably, making her calculations even more challenging. Sarah watched the grass and small trees visible through her scope, reading the wind patterns like a language she had spent years learning to understand. She could see places where the wind was swirling in different directions, creating complex air currents that would affect her bullet's flight path. Her breathing had fallen into the rhythm she had practiced so many times. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. Between breaths, during the natural pause in her respiratory cycle, was when she would take the shot. At that moment, her body would be as still as humanly possible, giving her the best chance for accuracy. Sarah made her final wind calculation and adjusted her scope accordingly. At 1 mile distance, even a small error in reading the wind could cause a miss by several feet. She estimated the wind would push her bullet approximately 10 feet to the left, accounting for the varying wind speeds at different points along the bullet's trajectory. The elevation adjustment was equally critical. Her bullet would drop nearly 40 feet over the course of its mile-long journey, following a parabolic arc that she had calculated down to the inch. She had fired hundreds of practice rounds at various distances to verify her ballistic data, and she was confident in her elevation setting. Through years of training, Sarah had learned to trust her instincts as much as her calculations. Something deep inside her, developed through countless hours of practice, told her when conditions were right for the shot. As she lay there in the storm, she began to feel that familiar sensation building inside her. The rain continued to pound down, creating small streams of water that ran off her weather gear and onto the ground around her. Her gloves were soaked, but her grip on the rifle remained firm and steady. She had practiced shooting in wet conditions many times, knowing that moisture could affect everything from her grip to the rifle's performance. Sarah's heart rate had slowed to its optimal level for precision shooting. She could feel each heartbeat as a gentle pulse that slightly moved her rifle. Between heartbeats, during the brief moment when her cardiovascular system was at rest, was another component of perfect shot timing. Everything had to align perfectly for success at this distance. The crosshairs in her scope were perfectly centered on where she calculated the target should be, even though she couldn't see it. This level of trust in her preparation and calculations went against every instinct most shooters developed. Usually, you could see your target and make final adjustments based on visual feedback. This shot required complete faith in her mathematical calculations and environmental readings. Sarah began her final mental countdown. She had developed this routine over years of competitive shooting, and it helped her maintain perfect focus during the critical moments before taking a shot. 10, 9, 8. Her mind became completely quiet. 7, 6, 5. Her body settled into absolute stillness. 4, 3, 2. At that moment, something unexpected happened. The wind suddenly shifted, and for just a few seconds, the rain lightened enough that Sarah could see the rocky outcropping where her target was positioned. It was like a gift from nature, a brief window of opportunity in the midst of the storm. She could see the bright orange steel plate exactly where her calculations had predicted it would be. But seeing the target also revealed something her calculations hadn't accounted for. The wind patterns around the rocky outcropping were more complex than she had anticipated. She could see areas where the wind was being deflected by the terrain, creating swirling air currents that would affect her bullet's final approach to the target. Sarah had perhaps 3 seconds before the visibility would close again. In that brief window, she had to process this new information and adjust her aim accordingly. Her mind raced through the calculations, factoring in what she was seeing about the local wind patterns around the target area. The adjustment was small but critical. She moved her point of aim slightly to compensate for what appeared to be a wind deflection zone just in front of the target. The correction was based more on instinct than calculation. A gut feeling developed through years of reading wind and terrain effects on bullet flight. As quickly as it had appeared, the target vanished again behind walls of rain and wind. But Sarah had seen what she needed to see. Her crosshairs were now positioned where her experience and instincts told her the bullet needed to go to compensate for all the environmental factors affecting its flight. Sarah's breathing cycle brought her back to the natural pause between breaths. Her heart was beating steadily and slowly. The wind was gusting at about 35 miles per hour with occasional stronger gusts. The rain was falling steadily but not torrentially at that moment. All the conditions were as good as they were likely to get during the storm. This was the moment she had been preparing for during 3 years of intensive training. Every practice session, every calculation, every hour spent studying ballistics and meteorology had led to this single moment. Sarah felt completely calm and focused, despite the chaos of the storm around her. Her finger moved to the trigger, applying the steady rearward pressure she had practiced thousands of times. The trigger on her custom rifle had been adjusted to break cleanly at exactly 3.5 pounds of pressure, giving her maximum control over the exact moment of firing. The world seemed to slow down as Sarah applied the final pressure needed to release the shot. In a few seconds, she would know whether 3 years of preparation and a lifetime of dedication to marksmanship had been enough to accomplish what most people would consider impossible. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that was immediately swallowed by the storm's roar. Sarah felt the familiar recoil against her shoulder as the powerful cartridge sent its projectile racing through the turbulent air toward the distant target. The muzzle blast created a brief cone of displaced raindrops around the barrel, and then everything returned to the chaos of wind and rain. For experienced shooters, the moment after firing is crucial for determining success or failure. At shorter ranges, you can often see where your bullet impacts and make adjustments for follow-up shots. But at 1 mile distance in a storm, Sarah would have no immediate feedback about whether her shot had found its mark. The bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach the target, and the impact would be impossible to see through the rain and mist. Sarah maintained her shooting position, keeping her eye focused through the scope in case the visibility improved enough to spot her bullet's impact. Her body remained perfectly still, a skill she had developed through years of training. Many shooters have a tendency to lift their head immediately after firing, but this can throw off their sight picture and make it impossible to observe the results of their shot. The seconds ticked by slowly as Sarah waited for any sign that her bullet had reached its destination. In perfect conditions, she might have heard the metallic ring of a bullet striking the steel target, but the storm made that impossible. The wind was howling across the ridge with such intensity that any sound from the target area would be completely masked. Sarah's mind began calculating the bullet's flight path in real time. Based on her muzzle velocity measurements, the projectile should have traveled about 1/3 of the distance to the target by now. It would be encountering the complex wind patterns she had observed through her brief glimpse of the target area, and those invisible air currents would be pushing and pulling at the spinning bullet. At the halfway point of its journey, the bullet would be experiencing maximum wind drift effects. This was where her calculations and wind reading skills would be most critical. Sarah had studied ballistics tables that showed how crosswinds affected bullet flight at various distances, but real-world conditions were always more complex than theoretical models. As the bullet entered its final approach to the target area, it would encounter the terrain-induced wind patterns Sarah had spotted during her moment of clear visibility. These local air currents could easily deflect a bullet by several feet, even after a perfect flight through the first part of its trajectory. This was where instinct and experience mattered more than mathematical calculations. The 3-second flight time had elapsed, and Sarah knew her bullet had either found its mark or disappeared into the hillside somewhere beyond the target. She continued to watch through her scope, hoping for another brief clearing in the weather that might reveal the results of her shot. The orange target remained hidden behind walls of rain and swirling mist. Sarah began her mental review of the shot, analyzing every aspect of her technique and decision-making. Her breathing had been perfectly controlled. Her trigger press had been smooth and straight to the rear. Her shooting position had been rock solid despite the challenging conditions. The rifle had functioned flawlessly, with no signs of mechanical problems that might have affected accuracy. The wind reading was the variable that concerned her most. Even with all her preparation and study, reading wind patterns in a storm at 1 mile distance required a level of skill that few people in the world possessed. She had made her best estimate based on visual cues and environmental indicators, but wind was always the most unpredictable factor in long-range shooting. Her elevation calculation had been based on extensive testing and ballistic data that she had verified through hundreds of practice shots. She was confident that her vertical hold had been correct, assuming her ammunition performed as expected. But even small variations in powder charge or bullet weight could affect trajectory at extreme distances. Sarah remained in position for several more minutes, watching and waiting for any sign that might indicate the results of her shot. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the visibility remained poor across the entire valley. She would have to make the journey to the target area to determine whether her 3 years of preparation had culminated in success or failure. The decision to leave her shooting position was not made lightly. In competitive shooting, it was common to fire multiple shots at a target to increase the chances of success. But Sarah had committed to taking only one shot, believing that this was the ultimate test of her skills and preparation. Multiple shots would have felt like cheating on the challenge she had set for herself. She carefully packed her rifle and equipment, protecting everything from the rain and wind. The weather was still dangerous for travel, but Sarah felt compelled to know the results of her shot as soon as possible. The uncertainty was more difficult to bear than the physical discomfort of the storm. The drive around to the target area took nearly an hour on roads that were becoming increasingly treacherous. Several times Sarah had to navigate around fallen branches in areas where water was running across the roadway. The storm was definitely one of the worst to hit the area in recent years, making her shot attempt even more challenging than she had anticipated. As she approached the area where her target was located, Sarah's heart began beating faster with anticipation and nervousness. After 3 years of preparation and a lifetime of dedication to marksmanship, she was about to learn whether she had accomplished something truly extraordinary, or experienced a humbling failure. The hike to the target required climbing up a rocky slope that had become slippery and dangerous in the storm. Sarah picked her way carefully through the rocks and wet vegetation, using her flashlight to navigate in the poor visibility. The orange target should be visible from several hundred yards away, assuming she could get close enough to see through the rain and mist. As Sarah crested a small ridge that put her within sight of the target area, she stopped and pulled out her binoculars. The rain was still coming down steadily, but she had a slightly better view from this higher elevation. She scanned the rocky outcropping where she knew the target was positioned, looking for the bright orange steel plate that had been her aiming point. What she saw through her binoculars made her heart skip a beat. The target was there exactly where she had placed it months earlier. But there was something different about it, something that made Sarah's hands shake as she adjusted the focus on her binoculars for a clearer view. She needed to get closer to be absolutely certain about what she was seeing. Sarah's legs felt weak as she scrambled down the rocky slope toward the target. Through her binoculars, she had seen what appeared to be a hole in the center of the orange steel plate. But she needed to get close enough to be absolutely certain. The rain continued to fall and her boots slipped on the wet rocks, but nothing could slow her down now. When she reached the target, Sarah stopped about 10 feet away and stared in complete amazement. There, punched perfectly through the center of the 12-inch steel plate, was a bullet hole. The edges of the hole were clean and sharp, indicating a high-velocity impact. Her bullet had found its mark after traveling 1 mile through some of the worst weather conditions imaginable. Sarah approached the target with trembling hands, reaching out to touch the bullet hole as if she needed physical confirmation that what she was seeing was real. The hole was approximately 3/8 of an inch in diameter, exactly what she would expect from her .338 caliber bullet. Most remarkably, it was positioned within 2 inches of the exact center of the target. She pulled out her phone and took dozens of photographs from every angle, documenting her achievement despite the continuing storm. The images showed the bullet hole clearly, along with the harsh weather conditions that had made the shot so challenging. She also took photos of herself standing next to the target, her face showing a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and pure joy. The magnitude of what she had accomplished began to sink in as Sarah examined the target more closely. At 1 mile distance, a 2-inch deviation from the center represented incredible accuracy. Many factors could have pushed her bullet several feet in any direction, but somehow everything had aligned perfectly to produce this result. Sarah thought about all the people who had told her that such a shot was impossible. Military snipers with decades of experience had warned her that attempting this in a storm was foolish and dangerous. Other competitive shooters had suggested that she was pushing beyond the reasonable limits of human capability. But she had trusted in her preparation and her instincts, and that trust had been rewarded. The bullet hole told a story of incredible precision under extreme conditions. Sarah's wind reading had been almost perfect, with only a slight deviation that had actually helped center her shot. Her elevation calculation had been exact, with the bullet striking at precisely the right height on the target. Every aspect of her preparation had contributed to this moment of success. As she stood there in the rain, Sarah reflected on the 3 years of preparation that had led to this achievement. She remembered the countless hours spent at the shooting range, gradually extending her distances and challenging herself with more difficult conditions. She thought about the nights spent studying ballistics tables and weather patterns, trying to understand every factor that could affect bullet flight. The physical conditioning had been just as important as the technical knowledge. Sarah had worked with trainers to develop the muscular endurance needed to maintain a steady shooting position for extended periods. She had practiced breathing techniques borrowed from meditation and yoga to achieve perfect breath control. She had even worked with a sports psychologist to develop mental strategies for maintaining focus under pressure. Her equipment had been carefully selected and meticulously maintained. Every component of her rifle had been chosen for maximum accuracy and reliability. Her ammunition had been hand-loaded to precise specifications, with each cartridge individually inspected before being approved for use. Even her clothing and shooting accessories had been selected to optimize her performance in challenging conditions. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had developed an almost supernatural ability to read environmental conditions. She could feel changes in air pressure, detect subtle shifts in wind direction, and interpret the behavior of grass and leaves to understand what the wind was doing at various distances. This intuitive understanding of the natural world had been crucial to her success. The storm began to intensify again as Sarah continued to examine her target. She realized that she needed to start heading back to her truck before the roads became completely impassable, but she was reluctant to leave this place where she had just accomplished something truly extraordinary. She took one final photograph of the target, making sure to capture the bullet hole clearly despite the poor lighting conditions. This image would serve as proof of her achievement, but more importantly, it would remind her that seemingly impossible goals could be reached through dedication, preparation, and unwavering commitment. The hike back to her truck was treacherous, but Sarah felt like she was walking on air. Every step was filled with the joy and satisfaction that comes from achieving something you've worked toward for years. The storm that had made her shot so challenging now felt like a celebration of her success. As she drove home through the dangerous conditions, Sarah began to think about what this achievement meant for her future. She had proven to herself that she could accomplish something that most people would consider impossible. The question now was what to do with this newfound confidence and capability. Word of her achievement would soon spread through the shooting community. Sarah knew that there would be skeptics who would question her story and demand proof of her claims, but she had the photographs, the documentation, and most importantly, the knowledge of what she had accomplished. Nothing could take away the satisfaction of knowing that she had pushed herself to the absolute limit and succeeded. The storm was beginning to clear as Sarah reached her apartment. She could see patches of blue sky appearing between the clouds, and the wind was starting to die down. It was as if nature itself was acknowledging that the challenge had been completed and normal conditions could return. Sarah carefully cleaned and stored her rifle, treating it with the respect due to an instrument that had just helped her achieve something remarkable. Every component had performed flawlessly under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The rifle had been her partner in this accomplishment, an extension of her will and determination. As she sat in her apartment, still wearing her wet weather gear, Sarah began to process the emotional impact of what she had just experienced. For 3 years, this shot had been the focus of her life. Every decision she made, every hour she spent training, had been directed toward this single moment. Now that the goal had been achieved, she felt a strange mixture of fulfillment and emptiness. 6 months after her impossible shot, Sarah found herself standing in front of a room full of military instructors and competitive shooters at the National Marksmanship Academy. The story of her achievement had spread far beyond her small Montana town, attracting attention from experts who wanted to understand how she had accomplished what many considered impossible. The photographs she had taken at the target served as undeniable proof of her success. Ballistics experts had examined the bullet hole and confirmed that it showed all the characteristics of a high-velocity impact from the type of ammunition Sarah had used. Weather Service records verified that storm conditions on the day of her shot had indeed been as severe as she claimed. Major Patricia Williams, a former military sniper instructor, had driven from Colorado specifically to meet Sarah and learn about her techniques. She had initially been skeptical of the story, believing that no one could make such a shot in storm conditions. But after examining the evidence and talking with Sarah about her preparation methods, she had become convinced that the achievement was genuine. "What you did that day challenges everything we thought we knew about the limits of human marksmanship," Major Williams told Sarah during their meeting. "I've been teaching long-range shooting for 20 years, and I would have said it was impossible before seeing your documentation." Sarah's story had also attracted attention from equipment manufacturers who wanted to understand how their products had performed under such extreme conditions. Her custom rifle had become a case study in precision engineering, with several companies asking to examine its specifications and performance characteristics. But the most significant impact of Sarah's achievement was on the broader shooting community. Young shooters across the country had begun following her training methods, inspired by the idea that seemingly impossible goals could be reached through dedication and proper preparation. Sarah had become an unwitting role model for a new generation of precision marksmen. The transformation in Sarah's own life had been dramatic. She had left her job at the local gun shop to become a full-time instructor and consultant. Students traveled from across the country to train with her, hoping to learn the techniques that had enabled her historic shot. She had also begun working with ammunition manufacturers to develop new products optimized for extreme distance shooting. Her relationship with her family had evolved as well. Miguel, who had initially worried about his daughter's obsession with long-range shooting, now bragged about her achievement to anyone who would listen. Rosa had finally accepted that marksmanship wasn't just a hobby for Sarah, but a calling that had led her to accomplish something truly remarkable. Jack Thompson, her mentor and the retired Marine instructor who had initially inspired her quest, had become one of her strongest supporters. He often told people that Sarah's achievement represented the kind of dedication and skill that embodied the best of American marksmanship traditions. The shooting range where Sarah had trained for years had become something of a pilgrimage site for precision shooting enthusiasts. The owner had installed a plaque marking the position where she had taken her famous shot, and visitors often asked to fire from the same location. None had yet duplicated her achievement, though several had come remarkably close under better conditions. Sarah's training methods had been documented and shared widely within the shooting community. Her emphasis on environmental awareness, mental preparation, and physical conditioning had influenced how precision shooting was taught at both civilian and military levels. Several military units had adopted modified versions of her techniques for their own sniper training programs. The scientific community had also taken notice of her achievement. Researchers studying human performance under extreme conditions were fascinated by how Sarah had maintained precision accuracy despite the challenging environmental factors. Her ability to read wind patterns and make split-second adjustments based on limited visual information had become a subject of academic study. Dr. Michael Chen, a sports psychologist who had begun studying elite marksmen, interviewed Sarah extensively about her mental preparation techniques. He was particularly interested in how she had developed the ability to maintain perfect focus while dealing with the stress and uncertainty of attempting something that had never been done before. Sarah's achievement represents a perfect combination of technical skill, physical preparation, and mental discipline, Dr. Chen explained in his research paper. What makes it even more remarkable is that she accomplished this as a civilian, without the extensive support systems available to military or professional competitive shooters. The media attention had been overwhelming at first. Sarah had appeared on several television programs and been featured in major magazines, telling her story to audiences who were fascinated by her dedication and success. But she had quickly learned to be selective about media appearances, preferring to focus on teaching and helping other shooters improve their skills. One of the most meaningful developments had been the establishment of the Sarah Martinez Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to teaching precision shooting skills to young people. Sarah believed that the discipline and mental focus required for marksmanship could help young people develop confidence and life skills that would serve them well beyond the shooting range. The foundation's first program had been launched in rural communities, where young people often lacked opportunities for advanced technical training. Sarah personally taught the initial classes, sharing not just shooting techniques but also the importance of goal setting, preparation, and perseverance in achieving difficult objectives. When I was growing up, I never imagined that a girl from a small Montana town could accomplish something that would attract attention from around the world, Sarah often told her students. But I learned that with enough dedication and proper preparation, you can achieve things that seem impossible. Her achievement had also opened doors to opportunities she had never considered. Several book publishers had approached her about writing an autobiography, and there had been discussions about a documentary film. Sarah was carefully considering these options, wanting to ensure that any media projects would accurately represent her story and inspire others rather than simply sensationalize her achievement. The target from her famous shot had been preserved and was now displayed in the National Shooting Sports Foundation's museum. Visitors from around the world came to see the steel plate with its perfectly centered bullet hole, tangible proof that human skill and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. But perhaps the most important impact of Sarah's achievement was personal. She had discovered that pushing herself to the absolute limit of her capabilities had revealed strengths and abilities she never knew she possessed. The confidence gained from accomplishing something truly extraordinary had transformed how she approached every aspect of her life. As she stood before the room of military instructors and competitive shooters that day, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that stormy morning 6 months earlier. The shy girl who had started shooting with her grandfather's old rifle had become a nationally recognized expert, whose techniques were studied and emulated by professionals around the world. The most important thing I learned from that shot wasn't about marksmanship, Sarah told her audience. It was about the power of believing in yourself and being willing to attempt something that everyone else says is impossible. Whether you succeed or fail, the attempt itself changes you in ways you never expected. The room was silent as Sarah finished her presentation. These were experienced shooters who had heard countless stories about remarkable shots and impressive achievements. But there was something about Sarah's story that went beyond mere technical accomplishment. It was a testament to the human spirit and the power of dedication to overcome any obstacle. As the applause died down and people began approaching her with questions, Sarah smiled and thought about her grandfather Carlos, who had started her on this journey so many years ago. He would have been proud to see how far she had come, and how many people she was now inspiring to push beyond their own perceived limitations. The storm that had made her shot so challenging had passed, but its impact continued to ripple outward through the lives of everyone who heard her story. Sarah Martinez had proven that against all odds, with enough preparation and determination, even the impossible shot could find its mark.